So, here we are at the beginning of the 20th century in the 1900s. Are we feeling strong? Have we made it this far? What we know so far is that the biggest innovations in advertising have been the newspaper, posters, and patent medicine. But wait, there's more. There were a few things that people came up with in the early 20th century that have continued to influence advertising to this day. And they are demand engineering, branding, and targeted advertising. So demand engineering sounds more complicated than it is, but it's the idea that advertisers came up with a reason why people needed to buy a product. So they pointed out something to you that you might not have known was wrong in your life before, and then they said, don't worry, we've got a product that can fix that. So it was, as Wu says, creating the desire that otherwise might not exist for products that people may not need. And so this is how we came up with things like Listerine as a mouthwash, because there were some very smart advertisers who said, hey, let's convince people that they have halitosis, bad breath, and that's why they're struggling socially, or they haven't gotten engaged yet, or they're alienating their friends and loved ones. It's halitosis, and Listerine's going to solve that problem. So they had a reason why they needed to buy the product. But it's not like they were worried about bad breath before Listerine told them to worry about it. And there are a lot of other products like that where someone clever said, hey, let's point out how this product fixes a problem, maybe a problem consumers didn't even know they had. So another thing to know about this is it often appeals to fears and insecurities. So all of the diet industry and everything else that's part of diet culture is in here with demand engineering, because it says, you're not good enough, but buy this and you might be. But they'll never let us be good enough, because then they'll stop making money. So be alert to this kind of advertising and figure out if it's really a problem that you need to solve when people tell you they've got the solution for it. So just as demand engineering still exists, even though we only saw the early examples of it, say in the early 1900s, branding is something else that is alive and well today, even though it has earlier origins. So branding is the idea of making an identity for the whole company and all of the products that it sells. So are you a Ford person or a Toyota person? It's a thing. We have teams, and companies want to be among the teams that we root for. So if you cheer for the Carolina Tar Heels, or you're an Apple person, or whatever it is, people have teams, and these brands want to be some of the teams that we root for. So branding is a little bit different than advertising, because advertising is intended to share an idea about a specific product often, although lately it is about promoting a brand identity. And branding is just that, making up a personality and a set of activities and commonalities for consumers to bond over, really. So this is an engineering of reputation, says Wu, and it makes us feel like that brand is different than any other brand. It was developed by Theodore McManus. He didn't like reason why selling, because he thought it was manipulative, and he said, well, instead of telling people there's something wrong with them, why don't we just say everything that's right about a company and help them feel like that company is friendly to them and wishes them well. And branding also starts to sell this fantasy about the good life, and it will appeal to us based on our emotions and sentimentality instead of on our insecurities. So that's something else that in early days, when branding was first being understood formally as a concept, that's something else that makes it different than demand engineering. Demand engineering, there's something wrong with you. Branding, just think about what it would be to be a Model T owner, a Ford person. Be a Ford person, as opposed to there's something wrong with you in your car. So that's the difference. Here's something else that Wu has to say on the issue of branding and brand identity. He says, quote, Going far beyond the question of usefulness or even quality, advertisers began to imbue products with traits and associations that consumers could identify with. So at a certain point, advertising stopped being about the product and what the product did, and instead it started being about how you might feel as a person who has the product. So it's about how you feel and how you think of yourself in a relationship with a brand and a company and their suite of products, instead of a zero-sum game where product equals fixed problem. Targeted advertisements were also an innovation from the early 20th century, and one of the best examples of this and most cited is the example of Woodbury's facial soap, which started out with reason why advertising, more or less, and it moved towards cultivating a very personal brand identity. So in the early 1900s, as today, women made the majority of household purchases, and targeted advertisements realized that. And they said, you know, if women are making all of the shopping decisions, then maybe we should advertise to women on purpose instead of sort of incidentally. So here's where targeted advertisements come in. They say, there's like a corner of a market, there's a segment of people, they segment the market, and they say, those people are going to like a different kind of ad than the public in general. So they said, well, women do the shopping, so let's advertise to women in particular. This was a very patronizing mode because they said that women didn't like a lot of writing, needed pretty pictures, were too simple to deal with complicated text, and they made an entire branch in some advertising industries called the Lady Persuaders, or it was the Women's Advertising Division, to advertise specifically to women. So it might seem like it's progressive to have targeted advertising towards women, but it's really not. It's to make money. The whole purpose of it was to make money, and they figured that women just needed different ads than men did. It's like the Big for Her thing, which trust me, we'll get to. So Woodbury soap, in the 1870s, the wrapper had that lovely picture of John Woodbury, a bearded man who looked very stern and didn't make you feel like you were beautiful. And at first, there was an effort by Helen Lansdowne of the women's editorial department to start telling people that the soap would make their nose pores look smaller. So this is a case of demand engineering. Probably women weren't looking at their nose pores that much before they saw that Woodbury soap might make the pores smaller. And frankly, any discussion still today about pores is still kind of demand engineering, because you're not paying attention to your pores until someone says, hey, look at your pores. So demand engineering. But about a year later, the Woodbury soap brand came up with Skin You Love to Touch. And this was a trailblazer idea, and it wasn't come up with Helen Lansdowne, but it was still for Woodbury soap. And this was a sort of advertising that showed a woman who was sort of single and middle class and looking kind of sultry and flirting with a man. And this was an early attempt at having sex appeal in ads, and it was also an early attempt at making a brand identity that was about a fantasy and a story instead of what the product could actually do for you. So it dangled the promise of this romantic encounter for the women who were stuck with the job of buying soap for their households. And maybe it was targeting single women in particular, but it might have appealed to all of the women who saw the ad and the men who also wanted to take part in that kind of image. And apologies for the heteronormativity in this example. So the Woodbury soap example worked when it got to the Skin You Love to Touch campaign because it was provocative and sexy, so it was surprising for people. And it was innovative as well because it participated in targeted marketing or segmenting the market. So they targeted young, single, middle-class white women, seemingly. And it was also innovative because it was created by women in that special department for women. So a lot of interesting stuff is happening with Woodbury soap, in spite of the fact that it is a soap with a wrapper of a bearded man looking at you. This also worked very effectively because it the soap advertisements circulated in magazines that had a wide readership. So it was really working hard to find women and sell women on the idea that they would be sexy and pretty and sought after if only they used this soap. So they had to really flip the brand identity from stern dermatologist with a beard to you too will have skin that's touchable and people will want to touch your skin. That's your fantasy. So there's a big change in the way that this soap eventually got advertised. So, according to Wu, the advertising industry figured out how to give women what they wanted, but a constantly receding ideal of what they wanted. So if you bought Woodbury's soap, you maybe didn't end up having the romantic getaway that you hoped for, but that's okay because there's another product that might give you that hope next year, and then there's another product that might give you that hope 18 months from now, and then there's another product that might give you that hope at another time. So all these products pile up and perpetuate consumer culture because they give a promise that they can't keep, and then someone else makes a similar promise and they can't keep it. So that's sort of where things had begun to emerge in the early 1900s. And thinking back to McLaren's article, we've got a few other things. So we had the polite pedant, and now we've got the expert. So it's the idea that we've got someone telling us what we're supposed to do. This is similar to demand engineering. It's advertising from authority and saying, listen to us, we know what's good for you. So it's the reason why, or hard sells. Those were prominent from the 1920s to the 1940s, and we still see these today. So instead of any of these innovations shifting the story completely, think of them as additive. We started seeing the hard sells in the 1920s or so. And then once advertising moved to television, and even starting with Woodbury soap, we moved to images that told a story, and this we might think of as a heart sell. So the hard sell, you got a problem and you can fix it. The heart sell, starting in the mid-20th century, you've got a fantasy and we can help you achieve it. And then we move sort of towards the 1960s and later, and people think about this as an era of creative revolution and postmodern irony. And what you need to think about this is the smart sell. So it's trusting consumers to be savvy and ironic and funny, and it gives them the kind of advertising that's multi-layered, that understands that we're all kind of in this consumer relationship. So the hard sell started earlier, starting in the 1920s even. Hard sell, there's a reason why, demand engineering. Then we have the heart sell. This comes with the advent of television, and that's the fantasy with the brand identity and thinking about having touchable skin. And then we have what I'm calling the smart sell, which is the smarty pants thing where consumers are in on a joke, and the creative component of the advertising industry is front and center. And we still see all three of these working sometimes together at the same time in the same ad, and sometimes differently for different products. So there was another reading that I had you look at, which is Pope's Brief History of Advertising. And Pope has a little bit of advice to us as we think about moving on with this class and reading an advertisement. First, consider the context, both the historical context and what we can learn about it, and also the material context of the document. So think about if the ad showed up in a magazine or a newspaper or on the airwaves, and if it was a television show advertisement, what time of day did it air? All of this contextual information tells us about the ad. Also, pay close attention to the symbolism. So why is the color red used? Who are the participants in a couple or a family unit? What does that tell us about society or values or the product? Look at ads like they are capitalist realism. So they're not real, but they're what the story, what does he say? It's a story that capitalism tells itself about itself. So they're not real, but they do tell us real things about values of a particular era. They're biased and unrealistic, but maybe aspirational. And then recall that people in a competitive creative industry make the ads, so there's a human element too in the way that ads come to be. So before next time, I'd like you to watch the real Mad Men of Advertising, 1950s, and I'll see you soon.